Hi folks, hope you're enjoying and benefiting from our guitar lesson series. Remember, it's essential that you watch these lesson videos in order. Each lesson leads into the next, and you won't get the big picture if you skip any of the steps. Many of you have been searching for these answers for years. You might be tempted to jump ahead and look at lesson 24 because you're into the blues, but if you don't know your intervals and modes from lesson 12 and 17, you just ain't going to get it. Consider purchasing the 150-page official course handbook for $19.95 from our website at www.absolutelyunderstandguitar.com. You'll find that link multiple places here on our YouTube channel. Each of the 32 video lessons has a corresponding printable page that you can view to help with review and memorization. All of the charts and graphs I create in the videos are reprinted there. The package also includes our amazing chord, scale, and arpeggio encyclopedia containing most every useful finger pattern known to man. Reserve your copy today. If you like what you're learning here, tell all your friends and like and subscribe to our channel. So enjoy this lesson and continue on, and you will absolutely understand guitar.
Hi, welcome back to Absolutely Understand Guitar. I'm Scotty West. Today, we finish up our discussion on the basics of musical notation and how it relates to the guitar. There's a lot more to reading music than I am able to tell you in this short time, but at least you'll have a basic idea about how to proceed with it. This is Lesson 10, so make sure your booklet is open to page 10. All set? Here we go. Hi, welcome back. Got a lot more stuff we got to cover today about music in written form. Last time we learned that written music is pretty easy to understand if somebody explains it to you the right way. It's basically just a graph. You've got, last week we talked about the vertical axis, which is the higher you go on the graph, the higher you go in pitch. And we discovered that if you wanted to notate the 50 white keys on a piano, that it would require a staff that looks like that, but that's too cumbersome for the eye to look at and be able to quickly see what's going on. So they created what we call the grand staff, and we found out that that is just alphabetical order for 4 octaves, from 2 ledger lines below the staff to 2 ledger lines above the staff. Now, today we're going to talk about what this means for the guitar. You don't read guitar music on the grand staff. As many of you know, you read the guitar on just the G clef up there, but we have to kind of show you how that works in a moment. Remember, these on the lines and spaces would simply be the white keys on the piano. So how do you notate the sharps and flats? Well, 2 ways. You either put a sharp or flat sign in front of the note, as we can see up here, or you have the key signature for the piece, where at the very beginning of the piece of music they give you a certain set of sharps or flats that you're supposed to continue to play as sharp or flat notes through the whole song. That tells you what key you're in. Remember, if you see, for example, if you see 2 sharps, now I actually wrote this later, but if you see one, let's say if you see 1 sharp in the key signature on the F line, that means you're supposed to play F sharp all the way through the whole piece. This means that actually, interestingly enough, that you're in the key of G, because if key signatures all relate to the major scale, and if you look at your musical slide rule and you set it up so that you're looking at a G major scale, G Ionian, you'll notice it's all white keys on the piano except for F sharp. You also have a list in your support material of the 12 different key signatures for the 12 different keys, and also what are called the relative minor keys too. And you'll see what that's about as you go. That's mostly what you have to know about the basics of pitch notation. Now today, in a few minutes before we start to talk about the rhythm stuff, I've got to show you how this specifically relates to guitar music, because guitar music is a little strange, and if somebody didn't show you this, you wouldn't quite understand it. You know that the strings of your guitar, as we talked about a few weeks ago, hopefully you've got this stuff memorized by now, go E, A, D, G, B, E, from low to high, right? Why are they tuned that way? Because there's 4 notes in between those, right? Because you have 4 fingers, that's how the guitar works. You know the G and B are only 3 notes apart, because they just discovered that that made more finger patterns possible on the instrument, and it just seemed like a useful compromise. But primarily the strings of the guitar are tuned E, A, D, G, B, E with the 4 notes in between. How would that look if we wrote that on the grand staff? Maybe we can zoom right in on these couple of measures right here, because we need, yep, there, very good. Let's see. If I were to write the strings of the guitar as they would appear on the grand staff, this is how they would look. The low E on your guitar is actually tuned to this note right here, which is 1 ledger line below the bass clef. It's actually a rather low note. That's E. And then A would be in the first space right there. D, G, B, which could either be written like this or as a ledger line there. These are the same note right there. And then E. So there are the open strings of your guitar. E, A, D, G, B, and E. That's how the open strings of the guitar would appear. Notice how most of them are on the bass clef. You're barely cracking the G clef up here with your high E string. You're really only getting up that far. Now, this may seem strange to a lot of you because you're familiar with the notion, if you've ever looked at guitar notation at all, you've noticed that actually you read guitar music on the G clef up here. How can that be if most of the notes actually appear down here on the bass clef? Well, the answer is, like I said, there are some strange little things you need to understand about guitar notation. The first thing you would like to understand is music for the guitar is always written 1 octave higher than it sounds. Guitar music is written 1 octave higher than it sounds. You see this low E down here? That's how it would actually sound. It's actually 2 E's below middle C on a piano. But that's not how it's written in guitar music. We'll look at this second measure over here, and you'll see that everything is bumped up by 1 octave. So, for example, instead of playing this E down here, it's bumped up an octave to this E right here. That is also an E, isn't it? If you look back at what you know up there about your grand staff, you know that that's an E, which is an octave higher than that E. And then A is this line right here, E, A, and then D is this space just below the bottom line of the G clef. That's D, G, B, and E. This E, A, D, G, B, E. Notice that's the same set of alphabet letters, E, A, D, G, B, E. But these are all written 1 octave higher, E, A, D, G, B, E. Now look how mostly we are centered on the G clef here. But notice also that we have a couple of notes that are actually still down here on the bass clef. What do we do about those when we actually read guitar music, which is only written on the G clef? Now, I'll show you that in a second. I just want to write up here to remind you. Guitar music is written 1 octave higher than it sounds. Now, people go, why did they decide to do that? And I'm not exactly sure. But my sense is, do you really think of the guitar as a bass instrument? No, not really. I mean, you think of the bass guitar as a bass instrument, but you don't really think of the 6-string guitar as a bass instrument. So it would be kind of odd to read it on the bass clef. Interestingly enough, though, it does play notes that are low enough to qualify it, in a sense, as a bass instrument, because really, as we saw before, a lot of it is actually written well down below middle C down here. I mean, that's where it actually sounds. But guitar music is written 1 octave higher than it sounds. Now, let's take a look down here if we can zoom in on this part of the chart down here, because there's one slight last little translation that you have to understand about how guitar music is written. Let's start at the high note and work our way down this time. The high string, as you know, is E, and then the next string below that is B, and then the next string below that is G, and the next string below that is D. You know, those are all on the G clef. aren't they? But we still have two more lower strings down here, which before we noticed were written on the bass clef. But now what we discover is the way they notate these in actual guitar language is on the G clef, but using ledger lines. For example, this would be then middle C. This ledger line here would be A. And then if we put another ledger line below that, the E would actually be in the space below that ledger line right there. Notice there's three ledger lines, middle C, and then the A below that, and then the F below that. So once again, here are our notes: E, A, D, G, B, and E. And this is how actual guitar notation looks. These are how the open strings of the guitar would be notated. They're all one octave higher than they actually sound, and which centers them better on the G clef than they would have if we written them where they actually sound. But still, some of these notes are well below the lines and spaces of the G clef, so they have to be represented by various ledger lines down here at the bottom. Now, the last thing then that I'd just kind of like to show you a little bit of is how certain very common chords that you play on the guitar all the time would look if you saw them written in standard guitar notation. One thing to mention is when you see notes stacked on top of each other like this, that means they're a simultaneous event in time. So that means it would be like a chord that's being strummed. When you see notes spread across the page, and we're going to be talking about that when we talk about rhythm notation in a couple of minutes. But the first thing to realize is when you see notes stacked on top of each other, you're supposed to play them simultaneously like a chord. So, for example, what are some of the most common chords you see played in popular music on the guitar? Well, how about a regular C major chord played in the C form? How about a G major chord played in the G form? How about let's say an E minor chord played in the E form, and maybe a D major chord played in the D form? Let's take a look at what these would look like if you saw them in standard notation. For example, C major chord in the C form with its root note on the A string, you'd be playing 5 notes, right? And they would look like this: C, E, G, C, E. All stacked on top of each other like that. C, E, G, C, E. If you are starting to memorize the lines and spaces of your G clef, you would agree with me. That's C, E, G, C, E. Now, that's because a major triad is 1, 3, 5 in the key of C. That's C, E, and G, and we just happen to be repeating C and E up above that. Now, a G major chord has a lower root note, doesn't it? It's down on the low E string in G form, isn't it? So we're going to need a couple more ledger lines to note our G major chord. That chord goes G, B, D, G, B, G. Like that. That's the standard way that we normally play a G major chord in the G form. Look, there's some interesting spacing of the notes there. G, B, D, G, B, G is how that chord is played when you strum a regular old G major chord in the G form. How about E minor? Now we're going to have to go down to our lowest. Our root note in E form is down on the low E string, isn't it? And that's the lowest note that the guitar will play. So we're going to be way down on our low ledger lines to notate this E minor chord. You're going to need 3 ledger lines plus the space below that line. Remember, that's the lowest note that the guitar can play right there. That's an E. And the spelling for an E minor chord is E, B, E, G, B, E. Like that. That's how a normal E minor chord in the E form. Notice how you're playing 6 notes. That's because you're strumming all 6 strings. E, B, E, G, B, E would be an E minor chord. Finally, how about a D major chord, which is rooted on your D string, which means you're only strumming the top 4 strings of the guitar. So we're only going to have 4 notes, and they are D, A, D, F sharp. D, A, D, F sharp is the spelling for a D major chord in the D form. So that's how many of your common chords would look in standard notation for the guitar. Now, that is finishing up from last time. This is most of what I can tell you about at this point on the subject of the vertical axis of pitch on the musical graph. The higher and lower you go on the musical graph, the higher and lower you're going in pitch. And you have to memorize your lines and spaces. You should ultimately learn the whole grand staff because even though you're a guitar player and guitar music is not written on the grand staff, an awful lot of the music that you're ever going to look at in your life is written on the grand staff, so you should have some knowledge of that. But then also you need to be able to make these translations into how guitar notation actually works. For example, that it's bumped up an octave and then it's written on the G clef with ledger lines to include the lower notes, these notes down here, down at the very bottom. Cool, that's all I can tell you about pitch. Now, let's go on and talk about the horizontal aspect of musical notation, which, of course, as you proceed across the page in the musical graph, what are you proceeding in? You're proceeding in time. And what word in our 6 main areas of music most relates to the concept of time? Of course, it's rhythm. So, today we're going to talk about rhythmic notation and how the little symbols work to tell you when in time you're supposed to play particular notes and how long you're supposed to hold on to them. The first concept that you've got to understand when it comes to reading musical notation is the concept of the time signature. Last week, we talked about the key signature, which tells us how many sharp and flat notes are going to be played in the song. This is information that's given to you right at the beginning of the piece of music. You'll notice that there are a couple of numbers there, and some of you have had some experience with this before. You see right at the beginning of the piece, you see your clef signs, and then you see your key signature with the sharps and flats, but right after that you're going to see, usually you're going to see some numbers, and by far the most common time signature of all is 4/4. You're going to see two number fours stacked on top of each other. This is your time signature. Now, what do these numbers mean in the time signature? A lot of people are confused about this. The top number is a little bit easier to understand than the bottom number is, and we'll be working on this for the next couple of minutes here. What does the top number of a time signature tell you? Well, it tells you the number of beats per measure. And what is a measure? Well, if we can look down here for a moment at these lines, and let's put a G clef here, like this is a little bit of guitar music that we're going to read. You'll notice that and we'll put a time signature here for now. Let's say we've got 4/4 right here as our time signature. You're going to notice these vertical lines in the music as you go across the staff. Each one of these lines are called bar lines, and the distance between these bar lines are called measures. A measure is the distance between bar lines, and this first number here on the top of the time signature, number 4, is telling you how many beats there are in between each of these bar lines. So let's say you've got a drum beat on. I'm going to turn the drum machine on here for a second. Most of the music you're ever going to hear is counted in 4, and this is a very common rock and roll type drum beat, isn't it? And it is in 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. If I was reading through my music down here, I would see that there would be 4 beats represented in between each of these bars. I'd be going 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So, and whatever I was supposed to play on those 4 beats, it would be notated in that particular measure in between those bar lines. So, the top number of your time signature indicates the number of beats per measure. A lot of people have a sense of that. This other number down here, the second number in the time signature, is a little more abstract, and people have a little more trouble than that with this one. The bottom of your number of your time signature indicates the type of note counted as one beat. Huh? What is he saying? It's the type of note that is counted as one beat. Now, what do we mean by types of notes? Well, that's where we'll look over here on the chart, and we're going to start to identify some of these symbols that we frequently see in written music, the types of note symbols. And many of you are familiar with these from music classes you've taken in school or other music lessons you've taken. You might remember your good old friend, the whole note, which is just a circle like that. Then there's a open circle with a post on it. That's called a half note. We'll write these names down in a second. Then there's a filled in note with a post on it, like that. Then there is a filled in note with a post on it and a little flag hanging off the post. And then finally, there is a note with a post that has two flags on it. Now, so you've had experience with these before, many of you. You might know that this open one is called a whole note, and the one with the post is called a half note, and the next one is called a quarter note, and the next one is an eighth note, and the bottom one is called a 16th. I'm not going to try to spell that whole word out. I don't have room. There's a little abbreviation, 16th note. There are, by the way, 32nd notes and 64th notes, which have either 3 or 4 of these little flags here. But they, in many ways, you're not going to see too many of those because they're like superhuman fast to play. Some of these real speed demon rock stuff, you may see 32nd notes and an occasional 64th note, I guess, but you can these are the most common ones you're going to see. Now, these are the types of notes right here, and that's what relates to this bottom number of the time signature up here. For example, if the bottom number of the time signature is a number 4, that means that a quarter note is going to be counted as one beat. So a lot of people, if I ask people, how many beats do you hold a quarter note for? Everybody always goes, oh, that's the one that you hold for one beat. And I go, well, no, well, that might be true, but that's not always true. The only time that a quarter note would last for one beat is when the bottom number of the time signature is 4. So if you're going to figure out how long these different note values last for, you have to discuss them within the context of a particular time signature. So in this column right here, let's look what the note time value of these would be in a key and a time signature of 4/4. Since we're in 4/4, that means that the quarter note is counted as one beat. Now, what that then means is this is the type of note that would have twice as much time value as that. In a time signature of 4/4, a half note would last for 2 beats then. It's twice as long as a quarter note. And a whole note would last twice as long as that, or 4 times as long as a quarter note. So it would actually last for 4 beats. That's what these different symbols tell us. They tell us how long to hold on to a note before we're supposed to let it go and go on to the next note. Now, these with the posts and flags down here are of lesser time value. Again, dividing the beat first in half, so an eighth note lasts for a half a beat. And then finally, in a time signature of 4/4, a 16th note would actually last for a quarter of a beat. So, a quarter note, as many of you have been told, does not always last for one beat. It only lasts for one beat in a time signature whose bottom number is 4. Now, let's look up here for a moment and let's talk about some other common time signatures you're going to see. 4/4 is definitely the most common time signature. In fact, it's so common, 4/4 is, that oftentimes it's represented by simply a letter C. If you look at the beginning of some pieces of music, you are not even going to see any numbers at all. You're just going to see the letter C. Well, that stands for common time. It's just a little shorthand. They write the letter C. That means common time, and that's what 4/4 is. 4/4 is common time. It is probably the most common time signature of all. Now, another fairly common time signature that you're going to see is 3/4. That's 3 beats per measure, but the quarter note is still being counted as 1 beat. What do you call music that's counted in 3? You have any idea? Some of you know this, some of you won't. Traditionally, music that's counted in 3 is what's known as a waltz. And if you have one of these keyboard drum machines up here, if you look at the names of the different beat patterns there, any one that's labeled a waltz is going to be counted in 3. Instead of counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, a waltz is counted 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. Da 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 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 da 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 1 2 3 1. You know that very famous waltz like that. That's 3 4. Now another very common time signature is 2 2. This is for the first time where we see a time signature where the bottom number is not 4. What that means is there's going to be 2 beats per measure, but a quarter note is no longer counted as 1 beat. What is? Let's look back over here for a moment. If you see the number 2 as the bottom number of your time signature, you can assume that a half note is going to be counted as 1 beat. So, in a time signature of 2 2, the note values shift. A quarter note doesn't last for 1 beat. A half note lasts for 1 beat. So that means, again, you double it to make your whole note. So a whole note is going to last for 2 beats. And then you halve it each time as you go down. So a quarter note, which used to last for 1 beat, only lasts for a half a beat. An eighth note lasts for a quarter of a beat. And a 16th note now lasts for an eighth of a beat. 2 2 is also a fairly common time signature. In fact, it's so common that it's got another little shorthand that you often see. If you ever see at the beginning of your piece a C with a line through it like that, that's what's known as cut time, and it's just a shorthand for a time signature of 2 2. So 4 4, where the quarter note lasts for 1 beat, is common time, represented by a C, and 2 2 is represented by a C with a line through it, and that's called cut time. Now, another fairly common time signature that you're going to see is 6 8. That means 6 notes, or 6 beats per measure. And what kind of note is going to get counted as 1 beat? It's not going to be a quarter note. It's not going to be a half note. If the number 8 is the bottom number in your time signature, then that means that the 8th note down here is going to be counted as 1 beat. So if we look over here, if we see a time signature of 6 8, or any other time signature that's got 8 as the bottom number of the time signature, a quarter note isn't counted as 1, half note isn't counted as 1. This time, an eighth note is going to be counted as 1 beat. It means that a quarter note is counted as 2 beats, a half note is counted as 4 beats, and a whole note is counted as 8 beats. Again, you're just doubling it as you go up. That also means that a 16th note down here is counted as a half a beat. So that's a little bit of stuff on how time signatures relate to the number of beats per measure, as we saw in between the bar lines in the music. You've got your the number of beats as indicated by the time signature. These are the most common time signatures, I want to say. There are some other ones that are common too. You're going to see 2 4. And you're going to see, I don't know, there's a bunch of them. What you're going to find out is mostly they're usually even numbers. We seem to like to count, most conventional music is counted in even numbers, 4, 2, 6, or, you'll see some things like 8 8 sometimes, or you might even see things like 12 8. That would be 12 beats per measure with an eighth note counted as 1 beat. The only odd number you're going to see very often, and you are going to see it quite often, is the 3 that's in a waltz time of 3 4. Now, these are the common time signatures. In this little box over here, let's just note some that might be rare, that you're not going to really see very much at all. Anything that's got as the top number The bottom number is always going to be either a 2, as far as I can tell, either a 2, a 4, an 8. And there's some stuff out there where the 16th note is counted as one beat too. I don't know whether you're ever going to see any bottom numbers other than 2, 4, 8, and 16. But the rare time signatures are the ones where the top number is an odd number, like 5 or 7 or 9 or 11 or something like that. The number of pieces that are written this way are rare compared to the ones that are written in the other time signatures. For example, if you think of 5s or 7s, there are only a handful of pieces that I'm aware of that I can think of at any particular moment that actually are counted in 5. A couple of them that you might know, I'll just mention. One is very famous jazz tune called Take 5. Do you know this tune? Oops. Let's see, I'll go up an octave. No, actually, I'll do it here. Ooh, that sounds kind of overdriven, doesn't it? Let me turn that down a little. You know that tune? Ba 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 da da ba da bum 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 ba da da dum bum ba da da dum bum. You know that very famous jazz tune, and it's counted da 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 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 1 2 3 4 5 1 2. There would be no other way to count that. You couldn't count it in 4. You couldn't count it in 3. The beats wouldn't fall in the right place. Interestingly enough, this is the year 2000. The big blockbuster movie for the summer was Mission Impossible. Remember the theme music to that? Dun 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 dun. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. That's like one of the other tunes I can think of that's in 5. A tune that I know that's in 7 that a lot of you know is Money by Pink Floyd. Bum 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 ba ba bum 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 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. Now, a lot of you, when you listen to that song, you might have gone, boy, there's something weird about that song. I can't quite tell what it is. But what's weird about it is it's kind of an odd time signature. It's a time signature that's got a 7 in it. And 9s and 11s, they're even less common than that. And the one problem you'll have is playing in odd time signatures is there are, for example, no beats in a conventional keyboard drum machine. Whoops, did I hit the button? There are no beats in a conventional keyboard drum machine like this that count in 5 or 7. That's how rare they are. They figure you're not even going to bump into those at all. In order to play with a timekeeper, a beat machine, a drum machine that will count in odd time signatures, you have to buy a programmable drum machine and then create your own rhythms in it for 7 or 9 or 11 beats per measure. Okay, now, one other thing that we have to talk about when it comes to the time signature and these note values here is the notion that in music, not only do you have to notate the places in the music where you make noise, but you also have to notate in the music the places where you are silent, where you are quiet. These things, as many of you already know, are called rests. And these are another set of little symbols that we'll put over here. These notes all over here all tell you when you're supposed to play, and you're supposed to make noise and hold it for 4 beats there. You know what I mean? But in music, you also have to notate the places where you're supposed to be quiet, and there's a set of symbols for that. Now again, let's talk about these like they're in 4/4. If you're supposed to be quiet for 4 beats in a time signature of 4/4, then you have a symbol in the music that looks like this. It's just a little black box that's written above the line, the middle line of the staff, and that indicates that you're supposed to be quiet for the length of time of a whole note, which in a key signature of 4/4 would be for 4 beats. If they want you to be quiet for 2 beats, you get a half note rest, which looks very similar. It's just that the box hangs below the line instead of being above the line as it is in a whole note rest. A quarter note rest is a weird, squiggly little thing that was originally designed to be made with a calligraphy pen. Kind of looks like that, like almost like a lightning bolt kind of thing. An eighth note rest is a line with a flag coming off it, and then a little bead or a little dot at the end of the flag, and a 16th note rest simply has 2 of those appendages sticking off it like that. So these are the symbols that we use to tell when we're supposed to play, when we're not supposed to play, how long we're supposed to hold a note for, and how long we're supposed to be quiet for. And all of that relates back to the concept of the time signature. Now, there are a couple of other things that you need to know about in terms of rhythmic notation. Another one is the whole concept of dotted notes. Dotted notes. So, for example, you're going to see things like dotted half notes. The dot, in this case, follows the note right after it. Dotted quarter notes, dotted eighth notes. And we'll just use these 3 examples right here to talk about what this does. And let's also talk about them. Obviously, these would have different values depending on what time signature you were playing in. But let's just, for our example here, let's just talk about them in 4/4. Hopefully, you'll be able to extrapolate how this would relate to other time signatures with different numbers as the bottom number of the time signature. But just to make it easier for us to deal with, let's talk about common time, 4/4. What does the dot do to the time value of the note? This is a little hard to describe. Hopefully, you'll be able to grab onto it. The dot adds half again the value of the note to itself. Huh? The dot adds half again the value of the original note to itself. For example, in a time signature of 4/4, how long does a half note last for? It lasts for 2 beats, doesn't it? But the dot causes us to add half of the original value of the note to itself. Half of 2 is, of course, 1. So a dotted half note in 4/4 lasts for 3 beats. See what I mean? Dot adds half again the value of the note to itself. The original half note was worth 2 beats. The fact that it's dotted adds half of itself to itself. So half of itself is 1 beat, so 2 and 1 is 3. Now, can you tell me how long would you, in 4/4, how long would you hold a quarter note for, a dotted quarter note for? Can you think? I'll give you a second. Well, in 4/4, how long does a quarter note last for? It lasts for 1 beat. The dot adds half of itself to itself. Half of 1 is, of course, a half, isn't it? So a dotted quarter note in 4/4 time equals 1.5 beats. How about a dotted eighth note in 4/4? Well, as you know, an eighth note in 4/4 lasts for a half a beat. Half of a half is a quarter. So a dotted eighth note in 4/4 time equals 3/4 of a beat. See what I mean? That's what the dot does. Now, just like you can have dotted notes, you can also have dotted rests, too. So, for example, you'll see a dotted half note rest would mean that you're supposed to be quiet for 3 beats. A dotted quarter note rest means you're supposed to be quiet for 1.5 beats. And a dotted eighth note rest means that you're supposed to be quiet for 3/4 of a beat. So rests and notes can both be dotted. Now, a couple of other symbols that you want to know about. And there's a lot more to this. Like I said, I'm not going to be able to tell you anything remotely like everything about notation. Remember, as I'm sure I've mentioned before, taking this video series from me that you're taking does not necessarily mean that you're not going to have to take some other lessons somewhere else. Particularly if you are in a if you want to learn to read music and you want to get good at reading, you want to be a number 10 guitar player, you want to be a jazz player, you want to be a classical guitarist, you're going to probably have to take other private lessons lessons. And as we mentioned, the way that you really learn to read music is by going into an exercise book and working your way over a period of time through book 1 into book 2. You may need another instructor to help you do that stuff. And the method books, as they go through, give you new information periodically about other symbols and about other ways of thinking about notation that I won't have a chance to tell you about. But at least we're trying to get you the basic ideas. And there are only a couple of other more symbols that you probably would want to know something about. Let's look down here. Remember, we've got our time signature, say 4/4, and we've got our bar lines going through the music. And as we know, each one of these bar lines then is going to have 4 beats in between it. Another thing that you're frequently going to see are, remember how we mentioned that there were notes that had dots alongside them up here? You're also going to see notes sometimes that have dots underneath them. Like if I make 4 little quarter notes, which of course in this measure of 4/4 would fill up the time duration of that measure right there. Sometimes you see little dots underneath the notes, not to the side of them as we were just discussing a moment ago up here, but you'll see little dots that are underneath the notes. This is what is known as playing staccato, and you might have heard that word before, staccato. Staccato is an Italian word. A lot of classical music lingo is from the Italian. Staccato means short and clipped notes. Short and clipped off. Even though it may have a note value of 1 whole note, you really don't hold it for that long. You just play the note and get off it quickly and leave dead air, if you will, in between the notes. For example, I'll play some notes on the piano. We don't have to zoom up here and look at this or anything. But for example, if here's my beat machine going in 4. Now, if I were playing regular quarter notes in 4/4 time signature, each one would last for 1 beat, so I'd be going like this. You know, these might be notes of different pitch, so I might be going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oops. Now, those were kind of like normal notes with a certain amount of, they all flowed together fairly smoothly. If I was going to play those same notes as staccato notes, these little ones with the dots underneath them, I'd be playing them quick, 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 with quite a bit of dead air in between them like this. See how I'm hitting them and getting right off them? That's as opposed to playing them smoothly like I was a moment ago. See, I hold each note until the next one's ready to go. But to play them staccato, I play them as quick little clipped off notes. That's what the dots underneath the note are. That's what's known as playing staccato, short and clipped. Now, the opposite of that is when you see, and I'll go down to this line down here. The opposite of that is oftentimes you'll see notes that are of different pitch connected with these lines like this. The notes are connected together with lines, kind of curvy lines in between them. These are what are called ties or slurs, and these have the opposite effect of what a staccato note does. These are notes that, this is what's known as playing legato, which means, in Italian, means smoothly connected. So they're not short and choppy. These are ones that are absolutely, you hold on to the previous note. Now again, you know, we're talking guitar here. I can play staccato or legato on the guitar too, of course. These are notes that are very smoothly connected in time. I guess actually, since this is a guitar program, I ought to be doing a little of this on guitar, huh? But remember, all these instruments work pretty much the same way. You know, if I was playing regular notes, quarter notes, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, they would all be smoothly connected. If I wanted them really to overlap into each other, so there's no dead air whatsoever between the different notes, I would indicate that with these slur symbols down here. They're smoothly connected to one another. Short clip notes like staccato on the guitar would be like, See, I'm releasing the pressure of my fingers on the string. So those would be like staccato quarter notes right there. Now, another thing you're going to run into sometimes is you're going to see notes of the same pitch. Oftentimes this occurs in one measure, but one of the clearest examples would be I have these two whole notes in two completely different measures here. Now, in 4/4, remember, which is our time signature for our examples right here, each of these would last 4 beats, right? So a whole note would fill up the entire measure. But what if you wanted a note in your music that lasted for more than 4 beats? What if you wanted a note that you were going to play 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 that you wanted to last for 8 beats? Well, obviously you couldn't write something like that in any given measure because that would be 8 beats would require 2 measures. So what you do is you would write the note twice and then you would tie them together, again, with one of these curvy lines like that. What that indicates, this is not 2 separate notes. This is actually one note that would last for 8 beats in a time signature of 4/4. You'd hit it right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Maybe I'm strumming chords like this on my guitar. And remember, chords would be a bunch of notes stacked on top of each other, but maybe I'm strumming like a G chord, and if I want to hold it for 8 beats, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4. The only way for me to write that would be to have 2 whole notes, but they're really, in the end, just functioning, since they're tied together like that, they're just functioning as one long note that lasts for 8 beats. Now, you will see ties within a measure, too. Like, for example, on occasion, you may see, for example, a quarter note and an eighth note of the same pitch tied together like that. Well, interestingly enough, even though there are 2 note symbols there, I won't take the time to tell you why they do it this way. You might go, gee, why don't they just make it a dotted quarter note? But there are reasons why sometimes it's more convenient to notate it like this. Since they're both on the same space, in this case they're a C, third space up, and they're tied together like that, their note values are added together, and this is not 2 separate notes. This is one note that lasts for 1.5 beats. So a tie of 2 notes that are of the same pitch turn them into one note, and their time value is simply added together, and that's what ties are. Mostly, that's all I can basically tell you about the symbols used in rhythmic notation. And what you have to make sure that you understand is then, if you understand the concept of time signature and you understand the values, the time values of these different notes, whenever you look at written music, you've got to assume that the numbers of symbols that occupy a particular measure have got to equal the number of beats that are indicated by the time signature. For example, if I'm here in 4/4, all of the little symbols that show up in any one of these measures have got to equal 4 beats. So let me throw a couple at you and see if you can tell me. Occasionally you run into a typo. Occasionally you run into some music that's written incorrectly. But let me ask you to kind of look at a few different examples here. You might want to pause your VCR and think about it for a moment or two, and as to whether these are correctly written measures of. And I'm going to do it in 4/4 again. Like I say, we don't have time to really investigate a lot of different time signatures here. We're just trying to get an idea. But let me give you some examples of measures of notes and see if you can tell me whether these are written correctly or incorrectly in the key in a time signature of 4/4. Ready? Let's say you're reading in 4/4 and you see a measure like this. Kind of crammed them in there. Well, that's 4 quarter notes, right? And in 4/4, a quarter note lasts for 1 beat, and since there's 4 of them in the measure, that would be a legitimate measure, wouldn't it? They're different pitches, they're different highness and lowness of notes, but 4 of them would equal 4 beats. How about this? What about that? we have a bar, a measure here, with 2 half notes. In 4/4, how many beats does a half note last for? If you look at your chart up here just a little, you see that in 4/4, a half note lasts for 2 beats. So if there are 2 of them in that measure, that would be 2 beats, and that would be 2 beats. That would equal 4 beats, right? So that's a legitimate measure of 4/4 music. How about this? And the posts on these notes, by the way, you might notice sometimes you write them up and sometimes you write them down. It doesn't really matter. You can write them up or down. The convention is if you're really high on the staff, like, for example, this note right here, you write the posts down because you're trying to get them to be on the lines and spaces. If you get down below, I believe it's the middle line, you start writing them up. Like, see these low notes, I wrote the posts going in an upward direction. Actually, I think that one still should have had a downward post, but anyway, now how about this? Is this a legitimate measure of 4/4 music? I have a half note and 2 quarter notes. Half note lasts for 2 beats. Each of these quarter notes lasts for 1 beat each, so that's 2. So that, once again, is a legitimate measure of 4/4 music right there. Here's another example. Here we go. Our time signature is still 4/4. What if we saw something like this? How's that? Is that a legitimate measure of 4/4 music? Got any idea? Actually, in this case, it's not. That's like a typo. That's like a mistake I made. Take a look at this. The dotted quarter note is 1.5 beats. The 8th note lasts for a half a beat. So combined, those things, this would be 1.5, and this would be a half. And these are 2 more 8th notes. Oftentimes you see 8th notes, this is what's called a beam. They're beamed together. 8th notes are generally beamed together in pairs to indicate that since they're a half beat, they together would equal 1 beat. So this measure only has 3 beats in it. There's something wrong here. You would never see a measure like that in 4/4. There just aren't enough symbols. I would need something to indicate 1 more beat somewhere in that measure. Might be a couple more 8th notes, might be another quarter note, might be 4 16th notes, might be a rest of some sort. In order to make this into a legitimate measure, let's introduce the concept of the rest here at the end. Now I have that symbol right at the very end. Now this would be to be quiet for 1 beat. So then that would be a legitimate measure of music. 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, and then be quiet for a beat, so that's 4. How about this? One last example. How about that? Is that a legitimate measure of 4/4 music? Yes, it is. Each of these 8th notes would be a half, so there's 1 beat right there. You've got your quarter note right there, which is a beat, so we've got 2 beats in this measure so far. An 8th note rest and an 8th note together would equal 1 more beat. And then you've got a quarter note rest here at the end to be quiet for 1 beat. And so once again, 1, 2, 3, 4. You'd have 4 beats in that measure right there. One thing that's a little bit confusing is, let's go back over here so I can show this over here. What about this? Is this a legitimate measure of music? Is that a legitimate measure of 4/4 music? People go, oh, no, it couldn't be. Look, these are all half notes. They each last for 2 beats. That would be 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. That's 16 beats in that measure. That's supposed to be only have 4 beats in it. That can't possibly be true. That can't work. Actually, interestingly enough, though, that is a legitimate measure because one other thing you got to understand, I think we mentioned this before, when you see notes stacked on top of each other, that means that they are a simultaneous event in time. And what that means is you're playing, in this case, 4 notes over here simultaneously. That's a chord. And what they're indicating is that I should strum this chord and hold the entire chord for 2 beats, and then strum, I don't know, maybe a different chord. I didn't really pay attention to what notes I was playing here, but strum a second chord and hold that for 2 beats. So really, in the end, you want to just think of these as kind of being like 2 half notes. These don't, since they're all simultaneous events, they're played at the same time. So that would be a legitimate measure of 4/4. It's just what you're looking at is chords there. So that would be something like strumming 2 chords and holding each one for 2 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So oftentimes you are going to see, particularly in polyphonic music, music written for polyphonic instruments like the guitar, you are going to see more notes in the measure than it looks like there should be. But if you notice, they'll be stacked on top of each other, and that means that they're simultaneous events in time. And that. Now, is there anything else I can tell you about rhythmic notation in music? I can't think of anything for right now. I got about 3 minutes left here. I just want to start to talk about something, and I think what I'm going to do is, towards the end of the series, I'm going to have a show where we talk about putting the whole thing together and about reading charts, because one thing I'm sure you know about this program is we're not actually getting to play many songs, are we? How could I do that? You all like different styles of music and everything like that. We're showing you the basics about how music and about how the guitar works, but you're at home there wanting to play. You want to play songs. You don't want to just sit there and listen to me talk all the time. Well, a lot of that you're going to have to do on your own or with other teachers and stuff. And so on your own, the best way to learn songs, of course, is by being able to look in songbooks. If you like James Taylor, you want to go to the store and you want to buy the James Taylor songbook, and you want to come home and you want to figure out how to play his songs from looking at the notation. Now, we've given you mostly what you need to know about that, but there are some other facts about how to read charts, the little chord boxes and stuff like that. Also, we need to talk a bit about tablature. In the last couple of minutes here, I thought I would talk way down here at the bottom of the page about tablature. We've mentioned this a couple of times before. Remember, this is a different style of notation for the guitar. In tab, you've got 6 lines instead of 5, if we could look down here. And all you see on these, remember, are numbers. Like, for example, 3, 2, 0, 1, 0. There's some tablature right there. These are, remember, in tablature, these are the 6 lines. These 6 lines are the 6 strings of your guitar. E, A, D, G, B, E. And these numbers simply tell you what frets to put your fingers on. This is nothing at all happening on your low E string down here. However, you want to play the 3rd fret on your A string, the 2nd fret on your D string. You want to leave your G string open. You want to play the 1st fret on your B string, and you want to play your high E string open. What would that look like? 3rd fret on your A string, 2nd fret on your D string, leave your G string open, put your index finger on the 1st fret on your B string, leave the top string open. What does that look like if you recognize from our discussion on chords? That's a C major chord, isn't it? Played in the C form. That's what it would look like in tablature down there. Now, if you see notes stacked on top of each other in tablature, that means, again, that they're a simultaneous event. They're strummed as a chord. But if you see them written like this, 3, 2, 0, 1, 0, you see where they're arrayed across the page like that instead of being stacked on top of each other? That means they're individual notes. So you would play them like this. If I saw them written on top of each other, they're a simultaneous bunch of notes, like a chord. If I saw them written arrayed across the page like that, they're single notes. where I'm plucking each individual string. Now, in tablature, there are a bunch of other symbols that you have to know about. Things for hammer-ons and pull-offs and bends and stuff like that. You'll notice you have a sheet of that stuff in your support material about how to read tablature. Also, like I said, I think at the end of the series, we'll do one last show on that, too. But anyway, that's all the time we've got for today. That's an awful lot about musical notation, and as I said, you may have to work with a private teacher to get into the exercise books and use all that stuff. Okay, well, until next time, we'll see you next week, and keep on practicing, okay? Bye-bye.